Today's episode is brought to you by Malwarebytes Premium Security. Protect your computers and devices from cyber attacks 24/7 with Malwarebytes Premium Security. And go to malwarebytes.com/lock and code for an exclusive offer. That's malwarebytes.com/lock and code.
One piece of equipment, and again, this is old equipment, one piece breaks down and they completely lose visibility. So they don't know where any of the trains are.
This is Lock and Code, a Malwarebytes podcast. I'm your host, David Reese. Our main story today is about old tech. In 1972, the California Bay Area welcomed its mass public transit system, BART, which stands for Bay Area Rapid Transit. Now more than 50 years old, BART today carries about 175,000 people every weekday on 5 separate lines to 50 different stations across dozens of cities, including all the way from Antioch deep in the East Bay to San Francisco on the western coast and down the peninsula to Millbrae. It has above-ground tracks, below-ground tracks. It's one of the only public transit systems in the United States that goes underwater through what is called the TransBay tube. It has a new fleet of railcars that go up to 80 miles per hour. It has 131 miles of track, and on May 9th, 2025, it all ground to a halt due to what BART officials at the time called a, quote, computer networking problem, end quote. At the Glen Park station in San Francisco, would-be travelers found yellow caution tape at the entry gates. At the El Cerrito Plaza station, BART staff and police informed visitors that the system was down. And at the Rockridge station in Oakland, a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle witnessed a small group of people sprinting up the stairs to try and catch a train that never came. BART was down, and so 175,000 people looked for alternative means to get to work. Some relied on San Francisco's public transit system, called Muni. Others tried to just work from home if possible, and still others considered taking a Lyft or Uber, only to be deterred by the prices. It was the kind of meltdown for public infrastructure that puts an entire system in peril. And it happened again just months later. In September, a network crash brought BART to a halt, repeating almost the exact same frustrations and delays for travelers left without transportation to work. And then another computer failure briefly caused another outage just a few weeks ago. So in one of the wealthiest regions in America, the subway doesn't always run. Its network is prone to crash, and any money for technology often goes elsewhere. Today, to help us understand the technology problems that stopped hundreds of train cars, the aging public infrastructure across America, and why we can't seem to fix big things, we're speaking with Rachel Swan, transportation reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, you had me at 3 outages. Did you know, can I give you a little fun fact about
Yes.
Another recent outage? This isn't quite as sexy, but you'll love this. Caused by, wait for it, a dog. A dog escaped the train, running through the tunnels of San Francisco, leading the train on an extremely slow game of chase. This system for 40 minutes. Okay, fun fact. Yes.
Do we know what kind of dog it was?
It looked like, according to witnesses, a Chihuahua, possibly a Chihuahua mutt, a very small dog. This required multiple police officers shutting down the track, shutting down the electric third rail. So yes, latest problem for BART.
That is fantastic. That's amazing. I'm glad to know that. I didn't know that. I truly did not know that a dog caused it. They say this old adage, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. On BART, no one knows that an outage was caused by a dog. So that's fantastic. I do want to start the episode here by, again, looking at those recent outages that I named. There were about 3 of them, and trying to see how they're related. So again, in May of 2025, in September of 2025, and just in February of 2026, BART suffered separate outages for a variety of reasons. Sometimes that was a computer networking problem. Sometimes once, right, that was a, quote, unusually heavy traffic, end quote, on the network. So all of that is to say, what exactly happened in those outages? You were there, you were reporting on them. What happened in those outages?
So I can tell you, I mean, this is like very highly technical in the what they were calling the network storm for one of the
Mhm.
outages that you just referred to it absolutely actually as extremely heavy traffic. My understanding is they were doing some kind of upgrade that caused a massive failure of the technology. So BART has since agreed to do upgrades on weekends. So, I mean, there you go. I mean, part of the problem is we'll just call it reluctance to work on weekends. So that was one problem. But another problem, there's a similarity with those three outages, at least. They're caused by quote unquote network or communications technology.
Yeah, yeah.
One problem for BART, the system opened in 1972, it was built in the 1960s, right? So the fundamental train control system that BART runs on, it's Westinghouse 1960s technology. So all the other equipment that like runs the trains, and they're run on what's called automated train control, which basically means the trains run in these track segments called blocks. There can only be one train in the blocks at the same time, yada, yada, yada. So
Yeah,
essentially
yeah.
like you have the system ideally driving itself. This was like totally cutting edge for the 1960s.
Yeah.
But again, 1960s. So like if you go into BART's data control center at Lake Merritt now, I have not been there. My spouse has been
Mhm.
there. He remembers it from a classroom field trip. This would have been like 19. We're old. So this would have been like 1990. He was like, it looked very cool and very old then, of like technology layered onto a fundamental system that's in the 1960s. Everything that they're putting on top of it, they're very, very slow to replace it. They've been on this like ongoing project to replace the 1960s era train control with what's called communications-based train control, which is what other transportation systems run on, but no word on when that's going to be finished. And it's taking a very, very, very long time.
I love this anecdote here about your spouse visiting in like the 90s, and already then it looked old. Like I'm remembering, when I was in elementary school, we had a computer lab in our elementary, and I'm just imagining that, but like even older, like, we had like the iMacs that had just come out and
Mhm,
there were
mhm.
different colors, as green and blue. Just imagine you're going into a substation and then it's every computer is beige and gray,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it's not cool in the sense that the technology from Alien is cool,
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
concerning. It's oh no, this is bad. I wanted to understand also, when we're talking about these things like computer networking problems,
yeah.
unusually heavy traffic, what is it? Is it the old system that's failing? Is it converting to the new system that's failing? Is it adding on a layer? I'm just trying to get clarity. What is happening there?
I think the fundamental problem is the old system is failing. I mean, they keep having these problems that have to deal with network connectivity. So the one that was the easiest for me to understand was the most recent outage you mentioned, which
Mhm.
was like a few weeks ago, right? That was during rush hour. It wasn't that long, so it didn't cause as much chaos as the previous two last year. So in that case, one piece of equipment failed. And this was, wait for it, a network card. Now, you as someone who understands computers, David, does anyone purchase a network card? Like when was the last time you've heard of someone like buying a network card? Like you were probably a kid, right? Like
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
20-year-old. So they said that this particular network card, so for those in the audience, I didn't know what a network card was, right? But so like BART runs on these very, very big routers. So like I guess imagine your computer at home, but it's like much, much bigger, right? And they have these like stacks of things that are called network cards that like parts of the system kind of plug into. So one of those sputtered out, right? And they said this network card was 10 years old. It had reached the end of its useful life. And they were like, "But we were going to replace it this year." So it's unclear to me. And this is one thing I'm trying to suss out is like, Are they replacing equipment on a schedule, or on like as soon as it breaks, we replace it? If you replace things as soon as they break, then you're going to have a lot of meltdowns. That's kind of a big problem. But yeah, so we know that a lot of the equipment that BART is using to run its system, when the network card broke, they suddenly lost visibility. Because so picture this, they have like a data center, a control center, sort of a CENTCOM or whatever you'd call it, where they're supposed to be able to see everything throughout the system. So like in the old days, when my husband goes and visits the center, it's like they're looking at like dots on a map, like, oh, that's train 457, that's train 452. I would hope now. So I haven't been there. I know what Muni's looks like, and Muni's is like cameras throughout the system where you can see like this big screen with panels, and like you see the different bus stops, the different angles, the different trains, the different subways, so you could kind of like have this crazy bird's eye view of everything that's going on in the whole system. I would imagine BART's is somewhat similar, but like one piece of equipment, and again, this is old equipment, one piece breaks down and they completely lose visibility. So they don't know where any of the trains are. So they have to call each individual operator. Where's your train right now? 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 That's why they had to manually kind of shut the system off, because if they can't see, they can't have it run, because they don't know if two trains are going to hit each other. So
oh my God,
that is the issue.
The idea of any system still relying on a network card, like you said, the last time I remember anyone buying a network card was my brother, who's 9 years older than I am. And he went to college in like 1999. So he went to undergrad, and my family bought him a laptop, and the laptop needed a network card. And that laptop, I mean, that thing had to have been like 3 inches tall, it's just this massive device. I haven't heard the words network card since then. So thank you. Thank you, BART. I also wanted to dig deeper, right, into these outages and how they've revealed some things about BART's technology. And we've talked about it before, but let's just dive in, right? What do we know about the BART system and its technology? I think this is kind of a broad question here. What is it? Is it computers? Is it software that gets added to those computers continuously? Like you said, it's this Westinghouse system from 1960. I don't think that company exists anymore. So again, really broad here, but what is it? What are we even talking about?
Yeah, and I should clarify, from sometime in that decade. So I don't know if it's exactly 1960 or 1962, or it is definitely dates to the 1960s. On the one hand, you have the physical, like the actual rail infrastructure. And that actually, a lot of that is new, right? Because they just replaced the fleet a few years ago. So they have these kind of like modern trains that actually are equipped with all this onboard software that does all this fancy stuff. But the fundamental, the kind of like heart and lungs and organs, the inner organs of BART is like a very old automated train control system. So that's the part that hasn't, I guess, like for myself, the best analogy it's not exactly like a very old person getting a lot of plastic surgery, but it's sort of like that. It's sort of like an old person getting like new hips and a new knee, like an old person who's like still like their liver is old, but maybe like they got some screws in their hips. So they got some nice hips, like some of their joints are new, but their liver is old, and they remember very well what it was like to be young. It's not exactly like an old person with like new boobs and a rhinoplasty, but it is sort of like prosthetics, and like the liver is still old, if you're with me here. So what's old, like that is like the best way for me personally to think about it, because like the cars are new, right? And BART is able to make change orders in its contract. It has been able to adapt some of the software, right? So like when they came in new, they had this problem. They had to slow down in the rain because, they didn't have the software capability to decelerate and just sort of adapt. So they'd slip and slide on the track. So they had to just slow down they just fixed that problem, right? So the new cars have software capabilities, but the fundamental train control system is like, this is old. And they're supposed to get something that is called communications-based train control, which is going to be, I think it's going to be more, I don't know exactly how it's going to be a more modern way of running the trains and spacing out the trains, and most importantly, not having all these breakdowns all the time. But it's just completely unclear when that's going to happen. This is like a multi-billion-dollar project that they've been working on for years.
On that, right? Do we know what else, if anything, is being updated currently? And even when it comes to like you said, this communication system, do we know, is there a schedule for that? So again, is there anything that is being updated right now? Is there anything on schedule, and is there like an actual date?
See, I love that you said schedule, because I think that is that is, I'm sorry for doing the snarky laugh, but I think that is like okay. I should back up. There's a big kind of elephant in the room here as we're talking.
Okay.
So we've talked about breakdowns, but fundamentally BART is broke. And BART is broke. BART is facing a $400 million a year deficit, right? So as it is like doing this like much needed upgrade to its core, it's also facing this totally, I mean, I know existential crisis is a cliche, but this is like literal. Like BART is like broke. Like BART is not sure whether it will exist 2 years from now. And I could get back to that.
Yeah.
But that has put a lot of, and BART has been kind of like shifting money from capital projects to operations and like moving funds around, and can we make it work? So that has really, I don't know if I would say like thrown into doubt yet, but it's like raised a lot of questions about their ability to do this incredibly expensive but much needed upgrade to their communication system. I mean, they have to do it. Like they cannot survive like they are now, where, you know, a network card breaks down and the whole thing has to shut down for like an hour while they figure out how to plug something into something else, which is literally what happened a couple weeks ago, right? Like, that is not sustainable. BART has this like financial crisis that seems to be getting in the way of its ability to modernize its system.
So, right, you mentioned here they have a $400 million deficit. I'm sorry, how do we even build up that much of a deficit?
I know, right? Like a GoFundMe is going to be really hard at this point. But yeah, sorry. It's like, oh God, I shouldn't make it. Okay. So you have to get back to like how BART's budget works up until the pandemic, right? Up until the pandemic. We all, like, you remember these days, right, David? Like pretty much the norm, hybrid work was definitely a thing, but like the norm was like people had to come to the office every day, right? So BART was moving 400,000 people. This was the number they always gave, 400,000 people through the TransBay tube each weekday. And so BART has capital budget and an operating budget. So its operating budget, two-thirds of a gigantic budget is funded by fares. So even with all the people who would hop the gates and cheat, you had enough money coming in through fares that it was funding this like massively expensive rail system. Then the pandemic hits, and obviously for a while nobody rides BART. And then people slowly come back. So the number you just gave at the beginning of the show was, if memory serves, it was in the 170,000s, right? Yeah. I was listening to your intro and I thought, oh my God, that's like nobody. Like nobody. Like, what are we doing? You know? And the answer is like, where am I today? I'm working from home. Like, we're working from home, right? So I used to ride BART 5 days a week. I now ride BART for work. I mean, you know, I now ride BART 3 days a week, you know, and my BART use is like not quite cut in half, but it's less because like most of us have the flexibility to work from home. Commute patterns are different. People have kind of the latitude to drive if they want to, you know, driving across the bridge. I just don't think there's that same kind of psychological barrier. And like BART has acknowledged, look, we're just not, people are not going to come back. Like they're not. We're settled in 3 days. Mark Benioff can say what he wants, but like people are not coming back to work like that, you know, and people kind of have other options. BART got big bailouts at first during COVID, and all of that money has dried up and it's not coming back. So now BART is like asking taxpayers for a bailout. And there's, I think there's a question of whether taxpayers are going to say yes, I mean, so yeah, the COVID funds have dried up. The riders are not coming back. BART, importantly, this is what a lot of critics say, like BART has not scaled back. BART did not, as ridership diminished, BART didn't really cut back the schedule. They kind of adapted the schedule, to sort of meet how people were moving a little bit. So they did adapt it a bit, but they didn't really cut it back. They didn't do layoffs. They didn't close stations. Whether or not that would have been a good strategy is an open question, but they've faced a lot of criticism for that. So yeah, that is how BART got in a huge, huge financial mess.
Are any of the upgrades, because upgrading a system costs money.
Yeah.
Are there some upgrades where they're like, this is the most bang we'll get for our buck? And I'm thinking about, BART installed like fare gates. And so that's an upgrade that costs money, but they're probably also saying this upgrade costs money, but it also brings more money so fewer people can cheat the system. I just wanted to understand, is there stuff like that that's getting priority?
I'm so glad, David, that you mentioned fare gates, because I've actually noticed like they are doing a lot of stuff like that. So yeah, so fare gates are actually a perfect example. I will say it took a long time for them to warm up to to do the fare gates. Like it took a lot, and a lot of pressure from the outside, a lot of pressure from riders, a lot of pressure, like the Chronicle was kind of hammering them too. Board members were hammering them. Like they knew it would be expensive. They knew it would be time consuming and laborious and expensive. So yeah, the fare gates, it took several years to kind of acknowledge that there was a problem with the old fare gates in that anyone could hop over them.
Yeah.
It wasn't sustainable to just have all your police just stand there all day.
Yeah. They're low. They were physically low gates, you could vault them.
Yeah, you could vault them. Like it wasn't sustainable to just have police stand there and cuff anyone who hopped the gate. It just no. Which they did try. Yes. So the new fare gates, I mean, expensive, time consuming. They've said the new fare gates basically bring in $10 million a year. They're getting new revenue. Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting actually is this is what BART said. Once they installed the fare gates, they saw a sudden, totally precipitous drop in the amount of maintenance for just basically vandalism. People just kind of randomly breaking stuff, or I don't know, spray painting, tearing up the bathroom, just raging, So it turns out that maybe many of the people who cheat BART also just like to wreck BART. It wasn't people who just couldn't pay their fare. That saved them a lot of money. They're doing a lot of you almost want to call it a little bit more on the cosmetic side of infrastructure. They also did the software update, a change order in their contract that made it so that when it rains, which it's not really doing anymore, but when it does rain, the trains could decelerate. So the elevated outdoor tracks get slippery in the rain. And that used to be that was a problem for the new trains. They weren't able to kind of intuitively or gradually adjust their speed. They would just have to, if they went from a BART is in blocks, and each block has a set speed limit. If they went from a 50 mile per hour to a 30 mile per hour, with the old software, they would have to just immediately switch to 30 miles per hour before they hit the 30 mile per hour zone. And it caused all these delays. But now they can decelerate. They've been doing stuff like that, stuff that's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, attainable, but they're not doing the big fix that they need to do, which is the train control system.
I love that one of the more recent updates they've made is the trains can slow down now. It just feels like, I didn't know that we couldn't do that. That's important. What happens if BART doesn't make up this $400 million deficit?
All right. So I'll tell you what they say is going to happen. So they've laid out different scenarios, like sort of a phased death of BART. And it would start as soon as like next January. Initially, they said, they would cut 10 to 15 stations. They initially like named stations. Now the board is saying we want like some discretion because nobody wants to close stations in their area they represent. Fine.
Yeah.
So they would start as early as January, which, gosh, that's like 9 months from now.
Yeah.
They would close stations. They would likely revert to what the system looked like. I don't know, David, if you remember this, if you're old enough or if you've been in the Bay Area long enough, but in the 90s, this was pre like airport extension and pre Dublin extension. So it ran to like Daly City, Fremont, Richmond, and like Concord.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it would just be like a much smaller system. They'd lay off like a third of the staff. Oh, they would still run to the airport though, because I think they do get business there. But they would run trains like once every half hour. They would stop service at 9.
Oh, that's so early.
Yeah, that's like kind of a common refrain. And then like what would likely happen is this would trigger a death spiral, right? Which is where like the system gets like crappier and crappier. And fewer and fewer people want to use it. They lose more money. They break down more. And then they have to close more stations. They have to lay more people off.
Yep.
And their guess was that within 2 years, they would have to basically just shut everything down because there's a point where it's just not safe to run it anymore. You just can't be responsible for like whatever the number would be at that point, 50, 100,000 people each day on a system that like is just like breaking down constantly. And like maybe they don't have enough police to prevent crime on BART. So that was their projection. Now, I will say a lot of people say this is just fear mongering. BART is just trying to get you to vote for the tax. A lot of people are very skeptical. They think BART is kind of exaggerating its prognosis. I do tend to believe that without a bailout, it could set off a death spiral for BART. But yeah, a lot of people are kind of like, oh, well, BART, this is a self-inflicted wounds, like you could have scaled back already. But yeah, that's the situation BART's in.
You've laid out this, I think, really unique story of public infrastructure just being completely unable to update, to modernize, to adapt, right? And obviously, COVID was a once-in-a-century kind of pandemic. Maybe we'll get another one. I don't know. And it's something that is obviously extraordinarily difficult to adapt to. We can't blame a system that much for not being able to adapt to, again, a global crisis. But it does still invite the question here as to whether or not BART's inability to update, is it unique, right? When we compare it to other major metropolitan public transit options, when we're looking at like New York subway system, when we look at the L in Chicago, do we know, are those systems, are other major metro systems, are they failing at the same rate? Do they struggle in the same way that BART does?
One thing I will say, because there was a lot of really great investigative reporting by the New York Times a few years ago about the New York subway. And it was having this was pre-pandemic, right? It was having some of the same kinds of problems as BART. Now, in my memory, like there was a lot of corruption in that situation and funding getting diverted to this and that and the other, but whenever you have a system that is old, that requires a lot of repair and it's heavy rail. So the infrastructure is extremely, extremely expensive. There's a lot of money on the line. If it is misspent or if it is sort of diverted for political ends, you're going to see a lot of breakdowns. My understanding is that the subway really course corrected after they came under a microscope and got a lot better in recent years. But other systems, I mean, like, another good analog to BART is like the DC Metro. Yeah. They've definitely had some problems. I was looking at the most recent outage of BART when they kind of lost. One problem that BART's having is that these network cards or whatever are failing and then they lose visibility of the trains. The Washington, DC Metro actually had a similar breakdown happen about a decade ago. and a train actually derailed. And I believe people died because, the train, they were also on automated train control, had to switch to manual, and something happened with the train. And so they had like a horrible calamity. So, I mean, over the years, various other public transit systems have had problems. And I mean, I think like one good antidote is, at least especially for the New York subway, it's like public scrutiny, and there's a lot of money on the line, and there's a lot of maintenance on the line, and the public should really demand accountability for these systems.
I wanted to close out here and understand why it's so hard to fund big things like this, particularly when they also benefit the public, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's especially in a region like Silicon Valley, in a region like the San Francisco Bay Area, right? We see companies just amassing wealth from a very different financing channel, right? Like venture capitalism is just pouring billions of dollars into companies that do what they did yesterday, but in like new and fancy ways. Like, here's how to surveil you, in a way you never thought of before. And so like that's getting so much money. But then a thing that it takes people from place to place in a nice and somewhat reliable way, except for the meltdowns, that we just can't fund. We can't figure out how to do it. And so to really broaden it out, why is it so hard to fund these things?
That's such a great question, David. One thing that people at BART will complain about is they'll say our funding model doesn't work anymore. And that's because, their funding model was largely based on people being reliant on BART and people, grudgingly or not, having to take it every day to get to work. 400,000 people used to take it across, like through the tube each day, it used to be something that people just depended on. And now people just have a lot more choice. They can, even the days that BART break down, like people have the flexibility to work from home. People can kind of choose to drive just because traffic is different. It's not necessarily better, but it's different.
Yeah.
There's not like rush hour quite the way it used to be. We have Waymos now that go to the airport. It's just, I think they've acknowledged this. Like, you just don't have the fair support anymore to fund the massive operating budgets for these systems. So what's happening is a lot of them, not all public transit depends on fares to operate. In fact, most doesn't. So a lot of them depend on sales taxes, but voters have to approve sales taxes. They're pretty unpopular. I don't know. There's also like, in San Francisco, they're trying to pass a property tax on Muni. That's going to face some kind of resistance, I would imagine. I live in Contra Costa County. I know we're going to have like 3 to 4 different sales taxes on the ballots this year, for various things. And I mean, other counties are also going to have sales taxes. So BART is kind of competing with a lot of other worthy public interests at a moment when people are really thinking about affordability. And that's just the kind of situation they're in, is like, people have choice. There are what we call transit dependent people, but that number is kind of small. Well, okay. It's not like small, but it's not 400,000. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
It's sort of like, can we make the case that, hey, we really need to preserve this system for, the small portion of the population that really needs it? Are you going to be able to sell that to the general public that may have the flexibility and may not need BART the same way?
Gosh, yeah. And on that sales tax note, right? I mean, I can't believe we're talking about sales taxes on the podcast, but it's like, it is, no. It's good to, like, to just say plainly, Alameda County, right? Which is where Berkeley is. Their sales tax, I believe, is 10%. Like, it's 10%. Because they're like, yeah, taxes. We're super into taxes, tax the hell out of me. It is interesting to see something as soon as that double digit number, I think, is rare in the United States. So at a point, it does actually, people start seeing things differently. It is hard to, even in a place as, as liberal as like Berkeley in particular, I think they will one day be like, I'm sorry, what? What are we doing? What's going on if I go across the bay? My sales tax rate goes down by 2%, it's hard to sell a product that benefits everyone to a public that doesn't use it every day.
That is exactly right, David. Yeah.
Rachel, I wanted to thank you again for coming on today's show, for explaining BART, for telling that little dog anecdote. Hello, that was great. Best way to start any episode. And again, just thank you for leading us through, I think, pretty simply, like what it takes to stop a train these days. So again, thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks for the opportunity.
To our listeners, we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Until then, stay tuned and stay safe. And remember, you can read all our cybersecurity coverage on Malwarebytes Labs at malwarebytes.com/blog. Finally, our intro music is by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com, and our outro music is by Woa from unminus.com. Today's show has been edited by our podcast consultant, Eric Johnson at lightningpod.fm. Thank you, folks.